All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. And Martyn, we're finally back after my little 6-week break, back in the office.
Going round Europe, Jake, that's what Aussies tend to do, isn't it, when they come to this part of the world? And how did it go?
That was great, mate. I think, because I currently live in Manchester, so I don't think I've seen as many Aussies since I've left Australia as what I did in this trip. Everywhere we went, we sort of bumped into another Aussie, so it was nice to hear that familiar accent. But
the key thing, were they Queensland or New South Wales supporters?
Well, a lot of them were from Victoria, funnily enough. They're all coming from Melbourne.
Don't speak to those.
No. So we couldn't get away from them. But no, we met a few good Aussies and did a really nice hike in Albania, along with 10 other Aussies, it felt like. So it almost felt like we were back home, but got to spend a bit of time in Turkey, Croatia, Albania.
And the Greek islands, I believe.
Greek islands as well.
Yeah.
So spent a lot of time at Milos and Naxos, lapping up the vitamin D coming from the sun. I've got a little bit of colour on me now.
It would be great if you could say you were lapping up the rugby league there, but clearly not.
No. Well, I was sort of keeping in touch and watching as much rugby league as I could, but it's quite hard when you're on the move. But thankfully, all the accommodation we had pretty good Wi-Fi, so I was able to stream it all, which was nice.
That's marvellous, isn't it? Yeah.
But yeah, so much sport on at the moment, mate, with the Olympics and obviously rugby league coming to the business end of the season.
Absolutely. You missed the third State of Origin game, didn't you?
Yes, I did, unfortunately, but
probably fortunately,
Queensland,
actually. Given that Queensland didn't win.
That's right. But as we were talking about before the podcast, a lot of people are saying that's one of the hardest fought battles of rugby league they've seen in a long time.
The hardest I've ever seen, put it that way.
Yeah. That's saying a lot coming from you, mate.
I've seen a lot of rugby league, but I've never seen a harder game. A more intense game, I should say.
No, absolutely. So unfortunate for the Queenslanders, but we'll get them back next year, hopefully.
I'm sure you will.
And I'm looking forward to getting some of our big front rowers like Big Tino and Tommy Flegler back next year.
Absolutely.
So holding out hope that we can reclaim the shield. But a lot of rugby league action over the weekend, mate. There's been a few surprising wins, a few surprising scorelines, but
for quite a few weeks as well, Jake, since you've been away. I mean, the obvious thing to remark upon is that St Helens have now lost 5 games in a row for the first time in Super League history. That's amazing,
bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah.
We never thought, and they're currently sitting in 6th place on the ladder, I believe.
Just 2 points ahead of Leeds in 6th place. That's absolutely right.
That's right.
And they were blitzed by Lee last Friday night, 46 points to 4 it was, and Lee deserved every point they scored, I think, and actually scored some great tries too. So, something's gone a bit wrong at St Helens. I know they've got a lot of injuries. That you've got to say that. And they face an interesting few weeks, I think, starting on Saturday at Hull, when they won't find it easy going there either, I don't think.
No, absolutely. Well, we might stick with this game for the time being, mate, but Lee, obviously, as you touched on there, a really great performance for them. They're starting to show what they're capable of and what we all expected they would be capable of once they got back to full strength.
Absolutely.
Do you think they're a real dark horse as the end of the season approaches?
Well, We've played. We've had 19 rounds now, haven't we, of the Super League competition? So there are 8 rounds remaining, and Lee have actually got 9 games left because they've got that game in hand against Wigan that will be played next Tuesday night. So I think they've got a real chance of getting into the top 6. The way they're playing at the moment, they are a top 6 side, clearly, but I think they will make it. I mean, they've got to win nearly all their games, and some of the sides currently in the top 6 have got to lose a few games for them to get in. But I think that's perfectly capable of happening. And I think if Lee do get into the top 6, they'll give it a crack.
No, absolutely. Now there's obviously been a bit of talk in the media. I guess St Helens is a club, they're always under pressure when they do drop a few games from their fans.
Yeah.
Do you think Paul Wellens is sort of feeling the pressure on that hot seat?
Well, if you aren't feeling the pressure when you've lost 5 games in a row, then you never will feel it, will you? Clearly he's got to be feeling the pressure. But, I mean, every coach is under pressure all the time. They always say that a coach is just a couple of bad defeats away from being sacked. And Paul, must be fairly conscious of that. There's also a lot of talk linking Lee Breers with a return to St Helens next year, which I don't know whether that will happen. I'd be I wouldn't be too surprised if Lee Briers ended up at Leeds as their head coach next year. So, you don't really... we've not got the inside knowledge on that, but, I mean, Lee is certainly going to be an important part of some team next year. So you've got to be under pressure when you lose 5 games in a row, haven't you?
And you think for someone like Lee... I can't imagine him coming back to the Super League unless it's for a head coaching role.
Well, you wouldn't have thought so, given what he's done at Brisbane. Although they're not doing well this year now, are they?
No.
They've fallen away really badly. So I don't know what's gone wrong there either. Maybe it's just the demands of state of origin that's causing that. But no, I think he wants to come back to England for family reasons, by the sound of it. So, it's very difficult when you're at one side of the world and your parents and so on. I know from experience that grandparents being in one side of the world and their grandchildren being at the other side of the world can be quite stressful for families. And, I think that's probably got a part to play in Lee Briers coming back here. But, I really look forward to seeing how he does when he does arrive here and what he does do.
No, absolutely. And we'll go back to the Thursday night game. We had Leeds 34 defeating Huddersfield 6. Now, I just want to say, Martyn, this matchup between Leeds and Huddersfield, whenever they play each other, especially this season, I don't know who to pick. I always feel like it's a bit of either one way or the other,
Well, I was a bit disappointed, really, because I anticipated a very close game. And, we've got Luke Robinson, who's taken over from Ian Watson as the interim coach since Huddersfield parted company with Ian a few weeks ago, again while you were away. And I thought they'd give Leeds a really good game, but that very first tackle, I mean, Leeds kicked off, Huddersfield collected the ball just on their own line, behind their own line, and Chris Hill brought the ball out in tackle number 1, and 3 Leeds defenders were on him like a swarm of ants and pushed him back over his own line for a goal line dropout. And that, more than anything else, illustrated the impact of Brad Arthur, I think, as the new coach of Leeds for this season. That showed a defensive determination by Leeds. And from that moment onwards, I thought, gosh, Leeds are going to win this fairly comfortably. And they went on to do that, and Huddersfield's goose was cooked, I'm afraid. But I think that game showed more than anything what Brad Arthur's brought to Leeds. And again, Leeds are 2 points outside the top 6. They look like top 6 contenders to me. And what we're sort of asking now is, well, if Leeds and Lee are both going to get into the top 6, who is going to drop out? And that's incidentally, we've in League Express, we've got a readers' poll every week, and this week the question is, of the clubs currently lying in 5th to 8th place in the Super League table, which 2 clubs will end the season in the top 6? Will it be Salford and St Helens, Salford and Leeds, Salford and Lee, St Helens and Leeds, St Helens and Lee, or Leeds and Lee? And it's an interesting question, and I'm going to be very interested to see what the eventual result of that poll is.
You can't help but feel like there'll be mixed results for that one.
Gosh, yes. Yeah.
No, very interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think that win for Leeds is, going to be the start of a bit of momentum for them under Brad Arthur? Felt like they just need to get that first win under him?
I think it does. I mean, it certainly felt that way if you're watching that game. And this weekend they play Salford away on Saturday. And what a big game that is. That's a really big game. Salford are 4 points ahead of Leeds at the moment, but Leeds could reduce it to 2. And we'll talk about the weekend's games a bit later, but that's really going to be a challenge.
That'll be a great matchup, that's for sure. Moving back to Friday night, we had Hull KR 40 points, defeating London 16.
Yes, I feel so sorry for London this year. And they played quite well, really, for much of that game. Hull KR went into an early 16-0 lead. You thought, my God, this is going to be a real one-sided scoreline. But then the Broncos scored a try in the first half to make it 16-6 at half-time. And they scored again early in the second half to make it 16-12. And you sort of thought, gosh, is this going to be the shock of all shocks? Well, it wasn't, because Mikey Lewis, I think, took a hand, and the Hull KR then pulled away to make it 40 points to 16. But London, you've got to admire the way they keep trying. And this young kid, Josh Rourke, by the way, if they do, well, they will go down to the Championship next year, but I suspect he will still be playing Super League for somebody next year. He looks a really potentially very good player to me.
No, absolutely. I wonder how many clubs are sort of watching that London side, thinking,
lots of them.
Next year we might try and recruit a few of those players.
Bill Leyland, who hasn't played for them this year yet, the hooker, he's going to Hull KR next year, isn't he? So, and I think some of the other players will be going to other Super League clubs.
Yeah. In the other matchup, another big scoreline, Warrington 40 defeated Wigan 4.
Well, that was almost unbelievable to see that scoreline. And I think Matty Peet was pretty shaken by it. I mean, they'd lost to Hull the week before. And, a couple of weeks ago, you'd have thought Wigan were walking away with the League Leaders' Shield. But now they're back in third place, with that game in hand, admittedly. But Warrington absolutely beat them convincingly, I mean, as the scoreline suggests. And it's difficult to, put your finger on precisely what happened with Wigan. I mean, I was saying to Matty Peet in a recent press conference that I don't think any team in modern rugby league can be at its best every single week. I think no matter how good you are, you will have peaks and troughs. And I think this has been a trough for Wigan this last 2 weeks. But knowing them as I do, and knowing Matty Peet and the Wigan players, I don't think that will last. And I think Wigan will come bouncing back. And, this Thursday night they play against Huddersfield, and I think that will be the start of them, bouncing back, as I say. And it's going to be fascinating to watch them trying to do it.
That's it. And every contending team wants to have that 1 or 2 losses before those games start to count at the back end of the season.
Absolutely. If you're going to have a bit of a bad run, you want it to be now and not in September and October. That's the point. All the teams try to time their good form for when it really counts, and I think that's one of the things that's happening at Wigan. I mean, I'm not saying they deliberately try and not play well, but they, have got one eye now on what's going to happen in September and October.
And you have to say that there is a lot more confidence that Wigan will bounce back compared to the Saints at the moment.
Well, they are looking better than Saints, although both teams were well beaten on Friday night, so you can't say that there was a massive difference. But I'd be very surprised if Saints didn't bounce back as well. I think there's too much quality there to. And it would be a good time to start this weekend, wouldn't it?
No, definitely. Moving on to Saturday's matchups, we had Salford 30 defeating Castleford 22. Quite a tight matchup, this one.
Well, I thought this would be a tight game, and I actually tipped Castleford to win it in the media tipping competition. So, Salford absolutely showed me that I'd got that one wrong. By the way, there was one very interesting incident in this game that I'd just like to sort of make some reference to, because it comes down to a rule change that I would like to see happen. Nenny MacDonald scored an early try and then thought he'd got another one because Mark Sneed kicked the ball high towards the Castleford line, towards Salford's right-hand side. And Nenny MacDonald and Jacob Miller went up for the ball. Nenny MacDonald caught it and went on to touch down. And it looked like a perfect try. Or it did to me at least. But then, and the referee gave the try as well, but went to the video referee. The video referee decided that the ball had bobbled slightly between MacDonald and Jacob Miller as they were both trying to catch it. So MacDonald caught the ball, it bobbled a bit, it touched Miller, who didn't seem to get his hands on it to me, but MacDonald ended up with it as he came to the floor and touched down. Now, technically, if it did bobble, then technically it was the right decision to say it was a knock-on. No argument with that. If that's what happened, although it wasn't clear to me that it did happen, but let's say it did, and the, I think the video ref was Aaron Moore, if I remember rightly. But in my view, a knock-on should not be decided to be a knock-on until the ball hits the floor. If two people are jumping for the ball and it bubbles between them, just let it play on. And whoever comes down with the ball, it's their ball. With some of our rules are too pedantic, and you often get that a big kick towards a defending line. Two players contest the ball bobbles between them, and it's then called for a knock-on. I don't think that's necessary. I think a knock-on should always be called only when the ball hits the floor. And apart from that, let the play continue.
Yeah.
That's one of my gripes.
Yeah, well, that's one of those rules where if you were a fan new to the game and you saw that call being made, you
wouldn't understand it, would you?
No. And in American football, it's play on if you bobble it into the defender but then regather before the ball hits the ground.
That's right.
You keep the possession.
Perfect. So. Absolutely. Well, they understand what the game's about more than we do, it seems. Their people, recognise, that the fans want to see great tries and good rugby and don't want to be witnessing stoppages, for very, very pedantic calls as the game progresses. And I just think it's absolutely crazy. And I wish we'd change the rule there.
We're interested to see what the traditionalists say. They might have a few angry words.
There are some people who don't want to. There are some people who would never change any rule at all.
Yeah,
and I can't blame them in a way because rugby league's a great game as it is. I can see why they'd want to be, fairly conservative about it. But there are one or two minor rules that I think could be tweaked. I mean, I'll give you an example. When the corner post was taken out of touch, a lot of traditionalists moaned about it and said that's just ridiculous, and yet it's led to some of the greatest tries we've ever seen. And similar to the 40-20, a lot of people opposed that rule, but that's opened up the game incredibly in certain situations, hasn't it? So sometimes the rules do need to be changed, or just modified. Not changed completely, but just modified, and we end up with a better game, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Nothing's perfect, and if you can change the rules to make it a better product, why not?
Absolutely.
Now, moving on to the final matchup of the week, we had Catalans 24 defeated Hull FC 16, I believe I have here. Can't read my own handwriting, but Hull FC looks to have improved over the last few weeks since I've been away, Martyn. They're playing a lot more competitively.
Oh, they have. There's no doubt about it. And they weren't quite good enough to win in Perpignan. But our image of the week was Sam Tompkins coming out wearing the number 29 shirt as he did last year. Quite an iconic shirt number for him. And scoring a try for the Catalans and generally having a good game. Being in the ear of the referee, of course, as you would expect him to be. And it was a good win because Catalans have had a bad run recently as well. So they needed to get back into winning form. And, they're up in fourth place now on 24 points, 4 points behind the three teams at the top. So, we'll see how they go. But, no, I thought it was a really enjoyable game.
And it makes you wonder, like, for Sam, he's obviously had a nice, lengthy break after last season. He's probably gotten a chance to get rid of some of those niggling injuries he had throughout his career.
Well, he's saying that he needs a lot of ice baths, though, even so, and, it's difficult to come back when you've been retired. And, of course, you've still got a problem knee. But he looked great on Saturday, and good luck to him. He's a terrific personality. He's the sort of guy that the game needs, and I'm just very impressed by what he's done, and coming back at the Catalans' hour of need, it seems.
Yeah, and I think a few weeks ago or a couple of months ago, he was saying how much travel he still has to do for his Sky Sports work. He's probably sitting there thinking, well, if I'm doing all this travel and I still feel good enough to play, I may as well
go
back and have a few games.
Why not?
But I agree with you, mate. He seamlessly, made his way back into that side, and it'd be interesting to see what sort of spark he can bring to that team.
Well, quite a bit, I think, by the initial evidence anyway.
No, absolutely. All right, mate, we might get into some of the... Oh, actually, just on that game, a couple of cards there. Tarek Sims and Lingy Sao, both given red cards for incidents during the match.
They've both been suspended, haven't they?
Yeah,
since then? Yeah.
And Tarek's was lifting an injured player.
I think he's going to be suspended for quite a while because that's a definite no-no, isn't it? Ed Chamberlain, I think, was the player who he tried to lift.
Yeah.
And I think I'm sure actually he regretted it as soon as he realised what he'd done. There was certainly no malice in it as far as I could see, but nonetheless it is a no-no. So I think we'll find that he's serving quite a suspension.
And that might just be one of those things where he didn't know that was a serious offence over here.
No.
I'm sure he's had to learn his lesson the hard way, that's for sure. Now, so we'll go into our news, mate. We had some big news last week that I think we all expected it, but the 2026 World Cup, it's been announced that it's going to be hosted by Australia with some games being played in Papua New Guinea. No real surprises here, mate, but what's your reaction to that news?
Well, we've been told that Australia will host it, but we've not been told, anything about the games and where the venues will be yet. So, it was totally expected, of course. Great to see some games being held in Papua New Guinea. I assume they will be all the games that Papua New Guinea will play. So effectively there are two home teams in this tournament. And of course a lot of people are saying that it's the precursor to Papua New Guinea having a team in the NRL. I'm still not sure about the wisdom of doing that, but I certainly think it's a great idea to have World Cup games in PNG. And we can all look forward to it. It's a shame in a way there are only 10 teams in the competition after having had 16 in some of the more recent competitions, but that's now a done deal, so we can't really complain about it. And I just hope that the Australian Rugby League Commission can make this World Cup really successful and that they can draw some big crowds, because the 2017 tournament, which was the last one that was held in Australia, I didn't think was a great success because there weren't many great crowds. There wasn't much promotion of it. It seemed to be almost a half-hearted event, and I don't think we can afford to see that again, to be honest, because rugby league has been on a great high in Australia and New Zealand, of course, with great crowds this year, great television viewership and so on, and I don't think we can afford to have a World Cup that's played in front of not full stadiums.
Are you surprised New Zealand aren't hosting any of the matches?
A little, but that's the way it is, and I personally, I'm not keen on. If I'm really honest about it, I prefer World Cups to be held in one country rather than more than one. I can see why they've gone to Papua New Guinea though, because obviously they will get great crowds in Port Moresby for Papua New Guinea's games. Those will be automatic sellouts. So I can see the logic of doing that. But we want to, they want to replicate that PNG enthusiasm in Australia, don't they? Really, that's going to be quite important.
No, definitely. And while I was away, Martyn, we also had the news that England versus Samoa has been locked in for the end of the season. Two games.
Yeah.
Which is great to see, considering that there was rumours at the start of the year that Samoa were going to pull out.
Well, yes. Obviously, people have twisted a few arms, haven't they? And made a few financial promises, presumably, to the Samoans, and they've decided to come, and I'm delighted that they have, because they've got some absolutely great players who will give England a terrific test, but we've got some pretty good ones ourselves. So I think this will be a great series. It's only a 2-game series, which is a bit of an eye-opener. Normally they're 3, but the games will be played at Wigan and Leeds, which are great venues, I think. So I'm really looking forward to these 2 games, and I think it'll be a terrific series, and be a shame if it goes 1-1 though, in a way, won't it? Because then you'd want a 3rd game, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think with the squad Samoa's going to be able to pick, you'd have to think that they will give England a bit more of a run than what Tonga did last season.
Well, Tonga had a potentially fine squad, but they were not. They seemed to struggle a bit, didn't they? And I think they were a bit disappointing in terms of the results from their point of view. But I think Samoa, obviously they beat us in the World Cup semi-final. There will be a strong feeling among the England players for revenge for that. And I think this will be a really compelling game. I think Samoa, as I say, they've got some fantastic players. I'm a great fan of Jerome Luai, for example. I hope he's fit and comes with the squad. And I think they'll give us a real good game.
Yeah, that's right. Jerome Luai, he's playing some really good football this year. So
yes.
Hopefully he comes across. But we had some sad news over the last couple of days, Martyn. The rugby league community is mourning the loss of one of the great voices of our game.
Yeah, Bill Arthur.
Bill Arthur, yeah, tragically passed.
And what a lovely guy he was. I don't think you ever met him, did you? But
no, but I've had some great memories of hearing his commentary and that voice.
Well, put it this way: if you had met Bill, you would have been impressed by what a genuine, friendly guy he was. I didn't know him that well, but every time I ever met him at any rugby league event, he always came across to me and said, great to see you, Martyn, and he always chatted as though he and I were long-standing friends, you know what I mean? And he would have been the same with you, even though he didn't know you. And it's so sad. He'd had this condition, prostate cancer, for, I believe, 15 years. I thought it was in remission, to be honest, Jake, and that's what made it so sad for me to hear that news. I thought he'd overcome it, but clearly not. And my condolences to his family and friends and to everybody who knew Bill. And it's just so sad. And the interesting thing was, the other slight shock about the news was to find that he was aged 68. I mean, crikey, he looked about 50 at most to me, did Bill. He's such a youthful-looking guy. Wonderful. I mean, he must have had a healthy lifestyle, is all I can say. But lovely bloke, and so sad to lose him. And, it's always tragic when you hear news like that, isn't it?
When you look back at some of his most iconic calls, which memories sort of...
Two memories stand out for me. The £1 million game in 2016 when Salford won at Hull KR. They came from behind to, I think there were 8 points behind with about 3 minutes remaining. And they came through, forced the game into golden point, and then Gareth O'Brien kicked the field goal that won the game for them and kept them in Super League at Hull KR's expense. And Bill was commentating on that one. And then, of course, he was commentating on the 2020 Grand Final, which was played at Hull in front of an empty stadium. Obviously, COVID rules were in place. And Jack Welsby scored that incredible last-second try that, came from a drop goal attempt by Tommy Makinson that hit the post, and Jack Welsby chased after the ball and beat Bevan French to it to touchdown for a remarkable score. And as I say, Bill was the commentator on that day who called it, and it was just a great memory.
I remember watching the highlights and then that call specifically when I was living in Australia, and he did a great job of summarising I guess
Absolutely.
The feeling of it without a crowd being in attendance.
Yeah.
Which
I mean, how
difficult
difficult is that to commentate on a game when there's no crowd there? That must be a really eerie sort of feeling to have to think that you're going to do that. And great for Bill that he pulled that one off. It's amazing, really.
No, absolutely. Our condolences go out to Bill's family and all his friends, and very, very sad news.
Yes,
mate.
Exactly.
Now, some other Super League news. John Bateman, he's going to join Warrington for the rest of the season.
As though they need him, actually, you've got to say. I mean, John is a great player and a lovely bloke as well, and is going to strengthen Warrington. But, after they beat Wigan so convincingly on Friday night, where will if he plays this week against Hull KR on Friday, where will they play him? Because, you couldn't really drop anybody, I wouldn't have thought, from after last Friday night. So, Sam Burgess has got an embarrassment of riches, hasn't he? Really. And I, by the way, I've written in this week's League Express that At the start of the season, Warrington appointing Sam Burgess looked like a gamble, didn't it? It looked as though, it was, a big headline, but you wondered whether it would really work. Well, I think that question has now been well and truly answered, and it clearly has worked, and Sam has done a great job with Warrington. The only thing that would worry me now, if I were a Warrington fan, and I am a Warrington fan really, because I'm a fan of every club, but if I were a Warrington fan, I'd be a bit worried about NRL clubs having their eyes on Sam Burgess now. And because I can see him going back there at, one day. But we ought to perhaps have Carl Fitzpatrick on this podcast, didn't we, the Warrington chief executive, to see whether he's planning to counter that attack by any Australian clubs that come after Sam.
Well, it makes you wonder, because at the moment, would Sam take a coaching job in the NRL that's not the Rabbitohs, do you think?
Well, I'm not sure that it'd be wise to take the Rabbitohs job. But there's so much baggage with the Rabbitohs and with Sam. I mean, Sam, was great with the Rabbitohs. It's hard to believe now it's 10 years since they won the grand final, 2014, with the Burgess brothers all involved. I think the pressure would be so great on Sam at the Rabbitohs that it might be sensible if he were to go back there, and I'm not, hopefully he's going to stay at Warrington for many years. But if he ever did go back to Australia, it might be better going to a different club, where the pressure wouldn't be quite, and the expectations wouldn't be quite so intense. But having said that, Sam Burgess is clearly a competitor who actually responds well to huge expectations. He's so competitive that, huge expectations and pressure don't seem to bother him in the slightest, do they?
Definitely. And, as you said, Warrington fans won't want to lose him. I guess Wayne Bennett signed on at the Rabbitohs for the next 3 seasons, I believe, as well. So,
but by the way, one thing about Warrington as well that's worth saying. I've got an article in the August edition of Rugby League World magazine, which I'm just holding up to the camera on for YouTube viewers. And I've sort of made the point that of all the clubs in Super League, I think Warrington have probably got the best social media profile. That they handle social media really smartly. They've got a very good digital output. And yet this year their crowds have gone down probably more than any other Super League club. Why is that? And of course, when you look at the IMG grading system, it awards a significant number of points for a club's social media profile. And yet you sort of wonder, is that sensible? Because in Warrington's case, their social media activity, admirable though it is, doesn't seem to be drawing a lot of fans in. In fact, if anything, fans have been dropping off. I suspect that for the rest of the season, having said that, after that win at Wigan, I think their crowds will be boosted massively, starting this weekend, this Friday night against Hull KR. But it's a mystery to me that you assume that if you're putting out some great output on social media channels, that it's going to draw people in to watch you. But that doesn't always seem to work, does it?
Especially with the success they've experienced on the field this year, Sam Burgess being at the helm, you think that alone would get fans going through the gates.
Well, you'd have thought so, but it's not really worked so far.
No. Well, we'll see what happens as the season goes on. I'm sure there'll be more coming through as the playoffs approach.
I think so, yeah.
Now, mate, the RFL has appointed Aussie comedian Adam Hills as its president going forward.
Yes. Well, Adam's a great guy, isn't he? And I really miss the Channel 4 coverage of Rugby League, if I'm really honest about it, Jake. I thought Channel 4 did a great job in the 2 years that they covered the game. And I think their coverage actually, if I'm blunt about it, is better than... I mean, the BBC. The BBC are covering the game, but we don't see games very often, do we? And they're switched about from channel to channel, whereas when Channel 4 did it, it was always on the main Channel 4 channel. And Adam Hills was a great frontman for most of those games. So, and he's an incredible rugby league fan, a South Sydney fan, obviously, but plays physical disability rugby league for Warrington. And, he's a great personality. And, the RFL has tended to go for people with a public profile as its president in recent years. I mean, currently the president is Sir Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker of the House of Commons, who is also a great rugby league fan. So that seems to tie in. At one time, being the president of an organisation, they'd give it to some elder statesman who, had probably served a lifetime in the game. But that doesn't seem to be what happens now. Whether you think that's a smart move, who knows? But certainly I know, having watched Adam, for quite a long time, I think Adam will do a great job in boosting the profile of rugby league in every way that he can, and that's great for the game.
That's right, and he won't be lacking any enthusiasm. That's for sure.
Not at all. No.
We might have to reach out to him, see if we can get him on the podcast.
I'd love to do that. Yeah.
Now, just touching on, we haven't really spoken about it because I've been away, but the two Vegas teams from England have been announced, Wigan and Warrington. There's reports, I think Steve Mascord said that 4,000 tickets have been sold now for Vegas already, which is great news. Do you think we'll get a few more tickets sold between now and then?
I'm sure we will. In fact, a few of the Aussie teams who are going to be there are looking a bit jealously at the way that the two English teams are selling tickets. I think that there'll be thousands of tickets sold to English fans. I think it'll be a great, weekend away in Las Vegas. The only sad thing about it is that it's for the Australian teams. It will be week 1 of the new season, but because we've got a longer season than the NRL, it will be week 3 of our season. So there will be games going on in England as well at the same time. And of course, there's the big question about the World Club Challenge. What's going to happen there? The feeling seems to be that if obviously we don't know who's going to be in the World Club Challenge at the moment. We won't know until October. But whoever it is, that game will probably be held the week before the Vegas games, and that could involve Wigan, and it could involve one of the Aussie teams that's going to be in Vegas, couldn't it? So they would probably play in Wigan the week before, and then both teams would fly to Vegas. But it's by no means certain to be Wigan, and it's by no, we don't know who it's going to be.
And it's not going to be held in Australia this year by any chance, is it?
I wouldn't have thought so.
That would be a bit logistically a very tough challenge to come to Australia, and then
it would.
Back to the US. So,
it would, yes.
That's assuming it's either Warrington or Wigan who wins the grand final. But
absolutely. Well, I think the NRL are very keen to see the World Club Challenge almost permanently in England, because if you look at the last 2 World Club Challenges, Penrith only drew 13,000 people when they played St Helens in 2023, and when Penrith came to Wigan earlier this year, it was a sellout. English fans take the World Club Challenge more seriously than Aussie fans. I'm not sure why that is, but it is a fact, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess there's a lot of reasons for that, but scheduling, marketing, the NRL needs to do a better job of marketing it when they are hosting it.
Got to, yeah.
But yeah, I would like to see it stay up here, especially after, 2 English teams have won it in the last 2 years. I think if you win it, you should, reserve the right to host the next one.
Absolutely.
Now, there was an article in League Express this week made by John Davidson reporting that IMG's senior lead, Matt Dwyer, is returning to Australia to work remotely. He's been, I guess, the man in charge of the IMG experiment here in England. Do you think he can do it remotely from Australia, or do you think it's better to have boots on ground here in the north?
Well, I don't know how many games Matt actually comes to. I mean, he's kept an incredibly low profile since the announcement 2 years ago that IMG were going to get involved in rugby league in this country. He's spoken hardly at all to the media. I would like to get him onto this podcast to be interviewed by us to talk about how AMG see things unfolding. I mean, these days, with modern technology, you can work from virtually anywhere in the world, can't you? He could move to Timbuktu, and with Zoom and Microsoft Teams and so on, you can communicate with people absolutely anywhere. So I don't think it's a massive problem wherever he lives. But having said that, some people might see it that way. Who knows? I'm not quite so sure. And there will be other people in IMG's head office who will be working on rugby league. But I just wish that they had a higher profile. Having said that, some people think that IMG are running the game at the moment. Well, clearly they're not. They are consultants rather than people who are actually involved in running the game. So the RFL, the RFL and RL Commercial can accept or decline their advice. And I sometimes wish that they would take a slightly different view. I've not been very impressed by the gradings process, but nonetheless, we'll see what happens.
It'd be great if before the season they could perhaps do like a presentation, like a live Q&A, something like that.
It would be
fans,
it would be extremely good.
Yeah, and then they could talk about the goals that they've set for that season, the benchmarks they want to hit, and then maybe at the end of the season they could do another presentation and say, hey, this is where we've succeeded,
Absolutely.
This is where we've fallen short, just to keep that transparency.
Well, I mean, people tell me, and I don't know if this is true, that the contract signed between the RFL and IMG, which no clubs have seen, to my knowledge, a lot of people say that there aren't any clear benchmarks for, what IMG are supposed to achieve. And if that's so, that's really disappointing, because in any contract with a consultancy organisation, if the thing is going to work, you normally set benchmarks for what they expect to achieve by certain periods of time. And if it's true that this contract doesn't have anything like that, I think that shows an incredible degree of naivety by the RFL. In fact, I can hardly believe it's true, and I hope it isn't. But if it is, it would show extraordinary naivety on the part of the RFL.
No, definitely. Moving on to just, I guess, the growing of the game more generally, the NRL, going to the NRL, the New Zealand Warriors made an announcement the last week that they're the first NRL team in history to sell out every home game this season.
And they're not even in the top 8, are they?
No. So really great news coming out of New Zealand, and it just goes to show how much the game is growing down there.
Well, I mean, there's an obvious potential, we've talked about it before, for a second New Zealand team to be based in Christchurch on the South Island. I mean, I don't think that could be put there straight away. I think it needs a massive build-up. But there's a brand new stadium just being completed in Christchurch, which I think holds about 25,000 people. It would be ideal for a new NRL team to play there. But all they need to do is to make sure that that team would be adequately financed, that it would be able to recruit the very best players. And Christchurch is a lovely town. It would be a wonderful place for anybody to live, I think. So, let's see whether that happens. I think it would be terrific if we can get another New Zealand team.
They just need to, make sure they make the most of this traction and keep building. And,
absolutely, yes.
The Warriors are another team that do such a great job of their digital output and their social media accounts.
Yes. Some people have been saying, they ought to transfer some games to Eden Park in Auckland, which of course is a much bigger stadium. But I don't think they should. The best marketing device in the world, or the best marketing phrase, are those two words, sold out. When you can put that notice up saying sold out, that in itself makes more people want to come and watch you. People underestimate how vital that is. If you can't get into an event because it's sold out, then very often it results in people putting their name down for the next event, or the next event at which they actually can get tickets. So I think it's a great thing, and ultimately, if they're ever to move to a bigger venue, wait until they're confident they can sell out that venue as well.
Absolutely. It almost, creates a bit of FOMO, fear of missing out when,
of course
when that sold out thing comes up. So,
absolutely.
Really great stuff. Really good to see. Now, looking ahead, mate, there's been a bit of a spanner thrown in the works. We all thought it was going to be Wigan Saints contending for a
I certainly thought it was going to be a Wigan Saints grand final, and it could still be, of course.
Yep. But what's your prediction at the moment?
Well, I think it's looking more like Warrington-Wigan now. But, I think Warrington were very conscious of how they didn't play well at Wembley in the Challenge Cup final. That was a real letdown for their supporters, I think. And I think Sam Burgess has conceded that they, did give a disappointing performance. But I'm sure that if they got to Old Trafford, they would be a lot better. And they'd, if they were playing Wigan, I think they'd give Wigan a very good game there. I'm not saying they'd win, because Wigan seem capable of turning it on in big finals. But that's. But then again, Hull KR are going to have a say in all this, aren't they? They will feel confident that they can get there. But I mean, it looks to be between those three teams now, doesn't it?
Yeah. And if you were to pick a dark horse, it's so hard with how tight.
Lee are my dark horses.
Lee, yep.
Lee, definitely. I think if Lee can get into the top six, I think they will give it a real big shake. And I could really imagine. And you remember when we spoke to Derek on the podcast, Derek Beaumont. Derek Beaumont is a Manchester United fan and would love to see his Lee team play at Old Trafford. And, I think that's certainly got some potential for actually coming about. If not this season, certainly in a forthcoming season.
Yeah, and at the moment, the way their squad is currently constructed, you'd have to think this season is probably their best chance, because there's a lot of
they're losing a few players
about next season, and the rumours have been circulating around Lachlan Lamb's future.
Yes.
We don't know where he will end up next year.
Some people are saying Hull, aren't they? I'm not sure whether that's true or not, but, Hull are signing half the Lee side, it seems, at the moment.
I saw someone in the comments calling Hull F Lee.
Yes, that's right.
With all the players they've poached. So, yes, I'm sure Derek's getting sick of them sniffing around.
I think I'm sure he probably is.
Yeah. But, hopefully that Lee can make some strong recruits to sort of, fill those holes next season. Anything else you want to get into, mate, before we get into this weekend's matchups?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered quite a lot of ground there, Jake, and we've got you back up to date now that you've come back from holiday with what's going on. I assume you'll be at a few games this weekend.
Yeah.
Oh, at least one game anyway.
Yeah, definitely. It's sort of funny because if, say, the internet didn't exist and I had no idea what was going on and I was to come back to all this news, I'd be going, really?
Yes.
St Helens,
absolutely.
Place. Wigan getting beaten by Warrington, and then Hull FC beating Wigan, 2 weeks ago. I wouldn't believe you. But yeah, lots happened. All right, mate, we'll move into this week's matchups. We've got two Thursday night games, I believe, this week. Castleford taking on Lee and Wigan taking on Huddersfield. Who do you have in that first matchup?
Well, I think Lee have got to win at Castleford, and they should be capable of doing it. But Castleford, are a very good team now. They've improved. I mean, if there's one coach who I admire enormously in Super League, it's Craig Lingard. Because what a great job he's done at Castleford. They were hopeless at the start of the season, but he's made some very astute recruitment. He's got the team playing together, and they've been playing extremely well. They've won several games. They could have won at Salford actually at the weekend, but didn't quite manage to pull that one off. But I think they'll give Lee a good game, but I can only see Lee winning because I think Lee have obviously got to win this game. And it's an important time for Lee because they play this Thursday. Then next Tuesday they play at Wigan in that game that was postponed at the time of the World Club Challenge. So it's going to be quite an interesting situation for Lee. And in another week's time, they could potentially be right on the verge of the top six.
Yeah, it's certainly a tough period for Wigan and Leigh because 3 games in such a short period of time will take its toll. But we'll see how they go. Wigan versus Huddersfield. Who do you like in that matchup?
Well, you've got to like Wigan. I think Wigan will bounce back from the 2 defeats and put a convincing scoreline on Huddersfield. I mean, Huddersfield, had been showing signs of improvement. They played very well at Leigh, which was the first game after Ian Watson departed the club, with Luke Robinson in charge. They lost to Leigh, but only narrowly. They then beat Salford and played very well in doing so. And I thought, as I say, they'd play well against Leeds last weekend, but they didn't. And Leeds beat them easily. So I can't see them winning at Wigan. And as I say, I can see Wigan running up a significant scoreline.
Yep. Friday's matchups, we got Warrington taking on Hull KR. I think that's the only match on
1
Friday.
versus 2. Would you have believed that? If somebody told you that just as you were going on holiday. No. But, potentially great game in prospect. I can only see Warrington winning. I think it'll be just a bit too much for Hull KR. I think Warrington's... they've got some really great young players coming through of Warrington, haven't they? Obviously, this young kid, Aaron Lindop, if he plays, I've been really impressed with him. He's a tough little guy. Well, not very little, a young guy, I should say. A real tough young guy and, can play at centre or on the wing. And I think he's a potential future star for Warrington.
I agree.
And, of course, they're going to have, John Bateman, who I assume will probably be selected on the bench for Warrington for this game. So he'll be coming onto the field at some stage. And I think, that's going to be fascinating to see, isn't it? How John does. I think it could just be a bit too much for Hull KR. But, don't write off Hull KR. They'll have... I mean, it's a Friday night game, so there'll still be quite a big travelling army of Hull KR fans, and it's going to be. I think it'll be a really enjoyable game to watch.
No, I agree. Could be a contender for match of the round, although Salford Leeds will also be very good.
Yeah.
But we'll move on to Saturday's matchups. We have Hull FC taking on the Saints.
Well, Saints have got to break this losing spell, haven't they? And Hull have improved tremendously over the course of the season. Simon Griggs has done a very good job as the interim coach. They didn't manage to win in Perpignan on Saturday, but they didn't disgrace themselves. And I think they'll give Saints a good game. But I think Saints will be desperate, and I think they will find a way to win this game and get back on track.
I agree. I don't think it'll be a walk in the park, but you think
Not at all.
Will get it done. Then the next matchup on Saturday, Salford taking on Leeds.
Well, I think Leeds have got this new defensive steel under the new coach, and I think it's going to be. I think Brad Arthur will find a way to beat Salford, and I think Leeds will win this game. But as I say, I also tipped Castleford to win at Salford last weekend. So I think Salford will be very happy if I don't pick them to win this game because I'm such a bad tipster.
No, we'll see what happens. I think that's probably going to be match of the round. That'll Hull KR Warrington. It'll be really interesting to see. Moving on to Sunday's matchup, we have London taking on Catalans.
Well, again, you can only see Catalans winning this game, can't you? And they need to win to make sure they're safe in the top 6. And I think they will win this game. It's going to be an interesting one, but London have improved a lot, and it'd be interesting to see if they can get another shock win against somebody. But I just don't think it will be against Catalans this weekend.
That's right. Obviously, Jared Wallace and Sam Tompkins back, so be interesting to see if they can really stamp their mark in that side.
Just one final thing to talk about, by the way. This morning, just as we were starting the podcast, there's been a press release from International Rugby League, the international governing body, saying that they're taking tenders, or they've had tenders for the 2028 Women's World Cup. and they've had 5 nations putting in bids to host the tournament, which is quite interesting in itself, isn't it? They've had 3 established rugby league nations, which is France, Papua New Guinea and New Zealand, and they've had 2 much less established rugby league nations, which is Kenya and South Africa.
Okay.
So that's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's great. It's great to see.
So I guess, if you're hosting, you're going to have a team competing.
Absolutely.
See, I wonder who's sort of, putting or submitting those tenders from those countries.
Well, who knows? But I mean, if they get support from their government and so on, it could be really great. And I would love to see a major rugby league tournament being played on the continent of Africa.
Yeah.
Whether it's in Kenya or South Africa, who knows? But, I think that would be... I mean, imagine going to Kenya for a, rugby league tournament of that sort. So, I mean, I don't know who's going to eventually be successful. But the interesting thing is that Australia and England are absent from that list of tenderers.
Interesting.
So fascinating to see who gets it.
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. I'd love to see it in a different country other than.
Well, maybe
Australia
we'll send you to
England.
Kenya if it's played there. That's your next holiday.
Yeah. My oath, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we've touched on the podcast before, like South Africa. There's so much talent there.
Enormous.
From rugby union that. Surely, if we could just tap into that pool there.
Well, they're the top rugby union nation now, aren't they? They seem to. They're the World Cup holders, and they seem to do so incredibly well. There's got to be some scope for rugby league there. You would have thought, wouldn't you?
No, absolutely, and we've touched on it before as well. It'd be great to try and get those countries involved through the form of a nines tournament, just to sort of
I think
introduce...
that goes without saying. Yeah, I think nines is the way to introduce new countries. And that, it's frustrating that we don't make more progress with nines, and that we don't have anybody who organises nines tournaments. Some people say that the Magic Weekend ought to be a nines tournament, but and I can see the logic of that. But you always tend to think, would the clubs take it seriously if there were a nines tournament? And of course, if there were $1 million at stake for the winners, they probably would take it seriously, wouldn't they?
Definitely. And we're seeing with the rugby sevens and the Olympics at the moment, like the US, they finished in the quarterfinals, I believe. I think Australia played them in the quarterfinals, and they're not really known for their 15-a-side rugby, but a very strong force in the sevens. So,
incidentally, France won the Olympic sevens, and their star player is a guy called Antoine Dupont. Yeah. And I was talking to somebody, emailing me, a guy who's a rugby league guy but takes a great interest in French rugby union. And he was saying, we were sort of saying to each other that the NRL, maybe with its growing wealth and power, maybe should be putting some money on the table to attract major stars from, rugby union countries that, are not necessarily strong at the moment, but get players like Antoine Dupont into the NRL to show, how he'd perform in that sort of environment.
Well, he's certainly got the build. He's got
it looks good enough,
really,
doesn't he?
really fit as well.
Yeah. He looks as though he could make the grade, I think, and I'm sure there are a lot more of those guys who could do. We've said, a lot of South African rugby union players look to have what it takes, and there has been a record of South African rugby union players in the past coming into the NRL, and even coming into British Rugby League. Some of our greatest ever stars, Tom van Vollenhoven being the greatest, have really made a massive name for themselves in our sport.
Oh, absolutely, and there's so many untapped markets that I think if we could invest a bit of money,
definitely,
But before we sign off, mate, we might just remind our viewers and listeners, if you want to grab yourself a subscription to the League Express paper or Rugby League World magazine, head along to www.totalrl.com.
That's the front page of League Express this week, down to the wire.
Yep.
Down to the wire.
The
wire, of course, being the name of Warrington Wolves.
Yep.
So that's marvellous, isn't it?
And
we've got
Ryan Hall.
Ryan Hall on the front cover of Rugby League World magazine, which... is just a great time to have him featured in the magazine, breaking records left, right, and centre. Fantastic player, broke Danny Maguire's record for tries in Super League recently, and onwards and upwards, joining Leeds next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are watching on YouTube, make sure you hit subscribe. We're at well over 1,000 subscribers now, Martyn, which is great to see.
Yes, onwards and upwards, Jay.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't forget you can listen to us on Spotify, Apple. Just search the League Express podcast and you'll find it there. All right, mate, we might wrap it up here.
Great stuff.
Do it all again next week.
See you again next week.
Sounds good. Cheers.
Thanks, Jay.